Imagine this. A woman who seems to have it all. Success, beauty, the picture-perfect life. And yet, every night when the city lights fade, she sits alone, feeling nothing but emptiness. Her name was Clara. To the outside world, Clara was the definition of made it. An executive in a glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. A calendar packed with meetings, awards on her desk, and a social media feed that made strangers envy her life. But what no one saw was that Clara carried silence in her chest like a heavy stone. She had built her world on appearances. The perfect smile, the polished words, the endless grind. And somewhere along the way, she had forgotten how it felt to be real. One evening, after another long day of pretending, Clara slipped away from the noise of the city. She wandered into a quiet jazz bar on a side street she had never noticed before. The lights were dim, the air smelled faintly of coffee and whiskey, and a soft trumpet carried a tune that wrapped around her like a secret. That's where she saw him. Ethan. He wasn't anyone remarkable by society's standards. A man in his mid-30s, working as a painter by day, bartending at night to make ends meet. But there was something about him. He had a gentleness in the way he moved, and a certain heaviness in his eyes, like someone who had fought battles no one else cared to notice. Clara didn't know why, but she stayed. Night after night, she found herself returning to that little bar. Not for the music, not for the drinks, but because of Ethan. The truth was, Ethan had his own shadows. Years ago, he had lost someone he loved deeply. And since then, he'd carried grief like a quiet companion. He too wore a mask. Not the polished mask of success like Clara, but the mask of strength. The act of being fine, even when his heart was still aching. And in the soft glow of that bar, two broken souls recognized each other. They didn't trade grand confessions. Instead, they shared small pieces of themselves. A story here, a smile there. Moments that felt almost ordinary. But in truth, they were anything but. Because for the first time in years, Clara wasn't pretending, and Ethan wasn't performing. They were just themselves. Weeks turned into months. Clara found herself laughing at things she didn't post online. She rediscovered the joy of simply walking through the city with no agenda, listening to Ethan talk about art, watching the way his hands moved when he described colors. Ethan, in return, began to paint again. Not for galleries, not for money, but because Clara reminded him what it felt like to see beauty in the ordinary. They weren't fixing each other. They weren't searching for someone to fill the void. They were simply standing beside one another, letting the walls drop, and finding comfort in being real. Of course, life didn't suddenly turn into a fairy tale. There were still long workdays for Clara. Still nights when Ethan's grief pressed heavy on him. But the difference was, they no longer carried those burdens alone. And maybe that's what love really is. Not the fireworks or the perfect photos, but the quiet presence of someone who sees you, behind the mask, behind the armor, and doesn't turn away. One late evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows of Ethan's studio, Clara sat watching him paint. There was no audience, no performance, no facade. Just two souls who had dared to stop pretending. And in that silence, Clara realized something. She didn't need more success. She didn't need to chase the next milestone. All she needed was this. A life lived honestly, with someone who understood the language of her quiet heart. So, if you've ever felt like you're drowning in the pressure to appear perfect, or if you've ever feared that your cracks made you unlovable, remember Clara and Ethan. They remind us that sometimes, the most beautiful thing we can give someone is not our highlight reel, but our truth. Because when the masks finally fall, that's where real love begins. Because in the end, it's not about how flawless we look, but how deeply we allow ourselves to be seen. Love isn't found in perfection. It's found in the courage to be imperfect, together.